The lights in the auditorium dimmed as the host's voice echoed through the speakers. "Please welcome former President David Monroe." A wave of applause erupted instantly. Cameras flashed as a poised, confident figure walked onto the stage with his signature stride. But just beyond the spotlight, behind the velvet curtain, Karoline Leavitt stood motionless, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a man at the microphone. She wasn't there for applause. She was there for truth. Only hours earlier, Karoline had landed in Chicago, the same city where a friend, Charlie Kirkland, once spoke passionately about rebuilding American unity. But today, she carried something far heavier than patriotism. She carried his final words. Words written in exhaustion, grief, and fading faith. Words directed at the very system Monroe had promised to fix and left fractured. On stage, President Monroe leaned toward the microphone and smiled. "We need unity, not division," he said, his voice calm and measured. "We need compassion, not chaos." The audience erupted in cheers. Karoline's jaw tightened. Compassion? She'd watched cities crumble while politicians tweeted empathy. She'd seen working families struggle while officials spoke of patience. And she had stood at Charlie's funeral, gripping the folded flag as his mother wept alone. No one from that stage had shown up. Not one. Unity, Monroe continued, his tone firm, is not about shouting. It's about listening. Karoline stepped forward from the shadows. Backstage, one of the aides reached for her arm, whispering, "He's still speaking. Please wait your turn." But Karoline didn't wait. Not when veterans were forgotten. Not when towns like St. Louis, Portland, and Minneapolis buried young men like Charlie, casualties of broken promises. And not when a man on stage stood rewriting history under warm lights and polite applause. Her boots hit the edge of the stage. Security shifted, uncertain. Monroe looked toward the disturbance. Karoline's voice cut through the air, calm but sharp. "I'll speak when truth goes silent," she said coldly. Gasps rippled through the audience. Monroe paused mid-sentence. Karoline stepped into the light, holding the folded American flag that had once rested on Charlie Kirkland's casket. The room froze. Cameras that moments ago adored the former president's practiced posture now turned to her. A young woman with white-knuckled hands, unflinching eyes, and an unspoken defiance. Her silence spoke louder than the applause that filled the air moments earlier. "Excuse me," Monroe said carefully, trying to maintain composure. "This isn't the time or place." Karoline's reply was steady, unwavering. "You mean a time and place where Americans can't ask why their friends are on the ground? Where mothers can't ask what happened to their sons after coming home to your promises?" The audience stirred, whispers, shuffles, nervous glances. "I didn't come here for a viral moment," Karoline said, stepping closer to the center of the stage. "I came because the last message Charlie Kirkland ever sent me said, 'They sold our future and smiled while doing it.'" Monroe's jaw tightened. "I know who I'm talking to," Karoline continued. "The man who called patriotism outdated, who watched communities fall apart and called it progress." "Miss Leavitt," Monroe interrupted, his voice firm, but she didn't let him finish. "Don't Miss Leavitt me," she shot back. "Not when Charlie's death came under policies you praised from podiums like this." A quiet wave of shock spread through the audience. "He volunteered to serve," Karoline said, her voice trembling but steady. "He came back to a country that couldn't find its courage. He died trying to wake it up." Monroe clasped his hands, tried to hold the moment together. Karoline unfolded a single sheet of paper, the last page of Charlie's journal. She didn't read it. She simply held it up for the cameras. "This isn't some political rant," she said clearly. "It's a cry for help, and no one answered." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was haunting, and for the first time in a long time, President David Monroe had no response. President Monroe looked toward his aides, subtly signaling to cut the microphone feed. But it was too late. Karoline's words had already reached every live stream, every news outlet, every phone in the room. No one blinked. Screens lit up, hashtags formed, and silence filled the air like a storm waiting to break. "This is what you don't understand," Karoline said, stepping forward. "You stood on stages telling us to hope, while our cities decayed, our soldiers fell, and our nation divided." She pointed directly toward him. Charlie didn't die because of one bad decision. He died because of years of leadership that mistook speeches for solutions and slogans for safety. Monroe finally spoke, his voice low, smooth, controlled. "That's a dangerous oversimplification," he said. "I led this nation through—" Karoline cut him off. "You led with speeches. Charlie led with courage. And now he's gone." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few claps followed, hesitant at first, then growing. "Don't try to pivot," Karoline said sharply. "Don't hide behind history books written to soften failure." She held up Charlie's journal again. "This page," she said, "is one you don't get to edit." Monroe crossed his arms. "With all due respect," he replied, "you're politicizing grief." Karoline's eyes hardened. "No," she said firmly. "You politicize his life. You turn people like him into symbols until they no longer serve your message." That line struck deep. In the front row, an elderly veteran stood and saluted Karoline. One by one, others rose too, not clapping, just standing in quiet solidarity. "You say he was part of the problem," she continued softly. "But Charlie believed America still had a soul, that we could reclaim it if we had the courage to face those who betrayed it." She turned toward the cameras. "And that's what I'm doing now." President Monroe stayed silent. The stage was still his, but the moment no longer belonged to him. The air grew heavy. Even the lights seemed dimmer, as if the room itself had forgotten how to breathe. Monroe's face stayed composed, but his hands gripped the podium tighter. He'd faced critics before, pundits, world leaders, reporters, but never like this. Never by someone holding a fallen soldier's journal in one hand and the nation's conscience in the other. Karoline didn't wait for him to respond. She stepped off the riser and walked toward the front of the audience. "Look at them," she said, gesturing toward the rows of veterans seated in silence. "They're not standing because of politics. They're standing because they remember who Charlie was and what leadership once meant." Monroe finally rose. His voice was calm, but edged with control. "You're using this young man's death to make a point," he said. "That's not patriotism. That's theater." Karoline turned sharply. "You want to talk about theater?" she said. "Let's talk about closing hospitals while funding wars. About smiling for cameras while families mourn behind closed doors. About shaking hands with the grieving, then forgetting their names." A murmur swept across the press row. "You sent condolences," she said, her voice tightening. "But you never remembered Charlie's unit or the reason he enlisted after hearing your speech years ago." Monroe blinked. Karoline lifted the folded flag again, her voice unwavering. "He believed in something greater than both of us. And now you tell me I'm the one politicizing it." Applause erupted, not from partisans, but from people, reporters, veterans, staffers, even a few who once stood behind Monroe. All joined in. Karoline looked straight into the cameras. "Charlie's death isn't a talking point," she said. "It's a wake-up call. And I'm not done ringing the bell." The crowd shifted, history tilting in real time. Pens dropped. Cameras zoomed closer. Even seasoned anchors exchanged uncertain glances, realizing they were witnessing something beyond politics. Karoline hadn't just confronted a leader. She'd challenged the comfort of silence itself.